It is my great pleasure to invite Cindy Chavez up, who is the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, who will now talk about Santa Clara County in terms of Michel Foucault, right?
Whatever you want. I imagine people don't say no to you very often, Maya.
I could introduce you to some folks.
So good morning, everyone. And I am really, really excited to be here. And one of the reasons I was excited to come is that I was told to be very blunt. And I don't get to do that in politics. I'm actually kidding. I'm relatively blunt all the time. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about myself and then talk about power from a political perspective. And I really want to focus on being very practical about how power is applied. So I'm on the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara County, and I represent about 400,000 people in one of the richest counties in the world. 39% of all of the people who live in the county I represent are foreign-born. We have one of the highest, in fact, the highest level of patents that are developed in the nation. We have one of the fastest and continuing growing job market. And our biggest challenge is that we're growing both in high-tech and in service sector jobs. So we also have one of the greatest, most obvious, well, there's just no way to say it. We have poor people on one side of the tracks and rich people on the other side of the tracks, and there's just no more obvious place to see it. We have the fourth largest homeless population in the country in one of the richest counties in the nation and one of the wealthiest places in the world. So why do I care about power? To me, power is an enormously practical tool. That the only way that we make change in a real and meaningful way, and I understand that on the board, I represent the poorest people in our county. I have an obligation to be excellent at my job, and that means that I, like you, need to understand how power works and how to wield it in a very pragmatic, practical way. Because when we don't do it, we have the fourth highest population of homeless people in the country living outdoors. That's the result of us not wielding power in thoughtful, effective, strategic ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about this as an insider and an outsider. So I'm now on the Board of Supervisors. I was the Executive Director of Working Partnerships. I was the Political Director of the South Bay Labor Council. I was the Chief Executive Officer of the South Bay Labor Council, and I was Vice Mayor of the City of San Jose. So I have been on both sides of the aisle, and I am here to tell you we can do better. We can do better. Now, let me talk about the first part of power that just excites me to no end, and that is that we can get good at doing it. Now, I have a question that will seem very inappropriate to some of you, and that is, how many of you are moms? How many of you tried to breastfeed? Okay, here's what you know. What you know is just because you get to be a mom doesn't mean you're good at everything, and that it doesn't come naturally. Right? And so one of the problems is that we go out in the world and we elect people to office and we think they have our values, that they're going to be able to do a good job and help us succeed. And Maya can tell you that you can have great friends who might as well be horrible enemies because they're not that helpful if they don't know what they're doing. It's true. It's 100% true, and you all know this. That and I think part of the reason we're so disappointed in our elected officials is we work really hard, we walk the precincts, we talk to them, and then we send them off and wish them good luck, right? And that's a minimum standard for democracy. The fact of the matter is that outside of you all investing in think tanks that have the capacity to turn into act tanks, you send us off really with a shield and no weapon, with a shield potentially and no vision. We need you, and we need that to be invested in. And I'm going to use two stories to demonstrate why I think it is so critical that we train people, and that we train not only the elected officials, but we train the folks who are heading our nonprofits to think strategically about power. So I'm going to give you my first example. In 2012, I was, at that time, the head of the South Bay Labor Council and the Executive Director of Working Partnerships. And a friend of ours came in to the office, who's a professor, and said, I have an idea. And by the way, when you're in a nonprofit, and you all know this as funders, that people come to you all the time with ideas that are horrible, right? And one of the ways you know an idea is horrible is when the person comes in by themselves and no one else, they've not talked to a single soul, and they come to you and they say, fix this, or make it so. So this happens all the time, and this person had come in with a couple of, I used to call them injured birds. They'd come in and say, oh, the bird's injured, and I'm like, I'm not a vet. You know, you fix it. Find someone who can help you, not me. So anyway, he comes in and he says, I want to talk to you about raising the minimum wage in San Jose. And we had a lot of problems at that time. We did not have a majority on the city council. Our unions were being taken down in a headlock over pensions. It was a bad time. We felt like we had no power. So the first thing I say to him is, no, we don't have time. We're trying to save our lives. And he comes back and he says, I really think we ought to do this. And I said, look, you need to demonstrate to me that somebody besides you and 4 other people care about this. Go do a poll. Now, for a lot of people, that way of addressing him was inauthentic. And this is one of the things that drives me nuts about the way we think about power. We have a lot of people in our community who think political power is icky and dirty and manipulative, and guess what? It takes research. You wouldn't expect Apple to produce a product without doing their homework. You just wouldn't. Why would we expect that in social innovation? So anyway, I tell him, go do a poll. He does a poll, and it's iffy, but I see something in it. And in our world, we were thinking, well, how do we do a good job? This is one of the other pieces of work that Working Partnerships was doing. How do we do a better job of training young people to get engaged and taking charge of their own lives? And really, it's kind of what Maya was talking about. Like, how do we do that? And what we realized is that if we got engaged in this campaign, even if we lost, we were going to train more young people to change the world than any single class we could put on. So we thought, okay, let's take a look at this. We did some polling, and here's what we found out. You have a good idea, and we did. People got behind it right away, the progressive community, so there was no infighting. And then we did a poll, and we asked the value question. So good idea, we married it to a value. The value question was this: if you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to make a fair wage. 80% of people in our community agreed with that. So we had a good idea, we had a good way of talking about it, and then came more drama, which was that we were going to raise the minimum wage from $8 to $10 an hour. And at the time, it was considered like, are you kidding me? That's a huge increase. The businesses are all going to move, and all the drama you would expect. And we had one really good partner. Derica, remind me who funded us to help us with that. NELP. God, I love NELP. So NELP helped us. But let me just say what was so exciting about this. We built movement and activity when we did not have a majority. We could not get the city council to put it on the ballot, and through volunteers and funding that we got from both NELP and the labor movement, we were able to put it on the ballot. We were outspent $600,000 to our $150,000, maybe. We're probably still paying that debt. But anyway, it was very lopsided. We won 60-40. One challenge we had with that, when we were trying to increase the wage from $8 to $10 an hour, some of our allies said, it's not enough. It just isn't enough. 40,000 people got a raise in one day. And I agree it wasn't enough, but it was enough to stay in the fight. And that's the other thing I would say, is some of our folks, we think power is dirty, it's not authentic, you have to negotiate, you have to compromise. And then I say to them, are any of you married? Really? Like, why would we think that the relationship to power would be any different than the relationship we have in your workplaces, in your marriages? Of course we have to compromise. That's not a dirty thing. We got to learn how to do it. So here's the other thing I'd say. Train people to learn how to negotiate. I cannot tell you how often I sit down with people that overplay their hand or underplay their hand. And I'm going to give you a second example. So we are in the process this fall of putting a tax measure on the ballot to increase our sales tax for transportation purposes. A lot of our progressive community, under the leadership of Working Partnerships and other nonprofits, were trying to get money to do two things. We wanted money for affordable housing, And we wanted money to make sure that we could increase transportation services for the disabled, seniors, and low-income in our community. We're going through the negotiation process, and out of a $6.3 billion budget, $500 million of that is going to be set aside for this particular population. 2 of the nonprofits we were partnering with said that isn't enough. We're not helping. And I have to say, here was the tragedy in that. They fought a valiant fight. They had very little power. $500 million? I don't know, sounds like a lot to me. But what they told their members was they didn't win. Can you imagine that? So the other thing is, we got to teach people how to negotiate, and we have to teach people how to win and how to use those wins to create the energy that gets us to the next win. Because most of the nonprofits didn't do that, we had a second opportunity and a second bite at the apple. And my board will be taking a vote on this because as part of that fight over that transportation tax, we were looking for $1 billion in housing money. And for a lot of different reasons, we weren't able to get it in that measure. But my colleagues are going to vote for a $950 million bond for affordable housing for the poorest people in our community on Tuesday. And we were able to leverage this outcome, even to have the debate, because of the way we handled that last fight. So here is my only point. Do not, as funders, don't be afraid to fund people who are building power. I feel like we have to color that in so many ways, but let's not be afraid to do that. Let's be bold. And second, let's help people. Let's train them. Let's teach them how to negotiate. Let's teach them how to understand power. Let's teach them how to grow it. Let's teach them how to use it. And the final thing I'll say is this. I am so profoundly hopeful that at a local level, local government, that I agree with Maya, we can't wait for the federal government to get its act together. It just isn't going to happen. But we create change, and you, investing in local government, allow us to be part of movements around minimum wage, affordable housing, fundamentally living wage. Living wage, we have one of the highest living wages in the country in my county now, all because of investments that people have made in people who aren't afraid to use power and who know how to do it. Let's get expert at it. Let's not be afraid to do that. Thank you.